Jersey Republican Congressman Chris Smith introduced the Stop Support for UNRWA Act. He joins me now. Sir, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this on this Saturday afternoon. We really appreciate it. First off, I want to give our viewers some idea of just how much money the United States is actually spending. We are the biggest funder of this aid organization, historically speaking. Look at that, $343 million. It's almost mind-boggling in a sense. We have paused our contributions for now, as have some other nations, including Germany there, that you can see right below us on the list. What I want to ask you is, what are we really funding with all of this money? And do you argue that we need to stop?
Thank you for that question. And the pause, frankly, unless it's real and the investigation is not just some superficial investigation, which I'm very concerned about, that just focuses on the 12 or maybe a few others that were involved, maybe hundreds. It's the entirety of UNRWA that's the problem. And this week, the House Committee on Foreign Affairs adopted legislation that I authored, 26 to 21, so it was heavily debated, and some voted against it, to completely defund UNRWA and shift all of the money to those organizations, NGOs, and agencies, perhaps at the UN, including the World Food Program, that could be vetted and are not anti-Semitic. The problem with UNRWA, Molly, is that from top to bottom, it is anti-Semitic. It trains children and teaches them to hate Jews. There's no doubt about it. I've chaired not one, not two, but 3 congressional hearings in the last 9 months alone. We've heard from experts about what's in those textbooks. And frankly, this isn't the first time. 20 years ago, I offered an amendment that passed in the House of Representatives to shift funding from UNRWA to other responsible NGOs and agencies that are not anti-Semitic. Unfortunately, we're talking about child soldiers facilities. That's what they're doing. Factories. They're teaching kids to hate. It starts when they're this big, and it goes right through. You wonder why all these kids are walking around with AK-47s and are throwing rocks and bombs and Molotov cocktails when they're 14 or 15 or even older, but even younger. It's because they've been trained to hate. And we've given them $1 billion. Trump, to his everlasting credit, defunded them. And then Biden came in, and he's given them $1 billion since he's been in office. And of course, as you pointed out, over $340 million is slated. So all this talk about the investigation, I'm very concerned that it not be a whitewash. Because that would be catastrophic, because the cycle of hate towards Jewish people would continue in perpetuity.
I'm making a couple great points there, as well as just kind of describing your history on this subject. And in some of these hearings, the experts involved have talked about where this money has gone in the past, to some of the schools, to some of these textbooks that produce very, really horrifying material, as you mentioned, some of it anti-Semitic, and ultimately feeding into an ideology that may have brought us to where we are today, watching things unfold. There's an argument coming from the other side that argues this funding should continue because it's almost a lesser of two evils sort of argument, that they can't get rid of all the bad actors, but that this needs to continue, the funding, because of the population, because of the effect it could have on the population if otherwise. But you mentioned just now that you believe there are other ways to fund and help the people of Gaza, the population.
And I did put that in my amendment, that nothing in the defunding of UNRWA precludes providing the money to others who then can provide humanitarian assistance. But you got to know, why are they still refugees for all these years, the Palestinians? Because they hope and work towards and commit acts of atrocities and terrorism for the day when there is no more Israel. And then they take it off, from the river to the sea. That's all about the end of Israel. And if you read the Hamas Charter of 1988, it is filled with murder, rape, murder, more murder, and the end of Israel, and that it's their duty to kill Jews. And that's what's taught to these children. There was just a report came out of the Times of Israel just a few hours ago that pointed out that right below the headquarters of UNRWA in Gaza Strip was a command and control facility, huge, for Hamas. Hamas and UNRWA, there's no distinction between the two. It's a distinction without a difference. And it's about time policymakers here in the U.S. and around the world recognize that, and that includes at the United Nations, maybe especially there. Otherwise, more Jews will die, and I think it's child abuse, Molly, to the Palestinian children, to teach them to hate and to want to kill and murder and rape Jews. And that's what they do. They do it nonstop.
Congressman Chris Smith, thank you so much for joining us. Some great points.
You.
And as you mentioned, a bright light shining right now in this organization. A lot of critiques happening.